Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be sharing on the theme, You Are the Light of God. And again, this is another theme so close to my heart and just something that I feel is so important that humanity awakens to is the fact that we are the light of God. We contain the light of God inside of us. I feel that there has been so much false programming and conditioning that God is outside of us. And not only that, there's so much programming and conditioning around, is there even a God? And is God a loving God, or is he a judgmental God? There's just so much around God in general. But something that was really huge for me in my awakening was realizing that I have the light of God inside of me, and that God isn't some figure, some being outside of me. He actually is what is giving me life and what brings me to life. And that light of God is something that I started to connect with through meditation and really through going very deep into presence, which I did through studying non-duality and listening to teachers like Eckhart Tolle, who talks a lot about presence and the present moment. And it was through really deep meditations, letting go of the mind, letting go of thinking, and resting into presence, that I really started to directly experience this light, this presence, this awareness inside of me. And it was through building up my connection with this, building up my intimacy with this awareness, this presence, this light, that I started to realize that this presence inside of me is the light of God. And that is just such an incredible thing to awaken to, that we have this direct connection with God inside of us through our presence. And what hides this presence is the mind. The mind is kind of like this overlay that sits on top of awareness, on top of presence. And the presence behind the mind is what illuminates the mind and, gives us the ability to perceive reality and perceive our thoughts and perceive all the information coming in through our senses. But, through studying non-duality and really becoming curious about awareness, I started to glimpse and have direct experiences of what we are beyond the mind. And I feel like this is something that we all need to awaken to. And this is why the journey within is so important, because we can only discover this light, this presence, this direct connection we have with God through the light within us. We can only have that connection from going beyond the mind, and through breaking this obsession, this addiction to compulsively thinking and thinking on autopilot. Like, really, humanity at this point is largely still enslaved by their mind, by their autopilot thinking, their unconscious thinking. And I can see that this is why God led me to discover him, to discover the truth through first having kind of a spiritual awakening, because that gave me this direct access to this light of God within me. And I didn't see it as being the light of God when I was first listening to teachers and discovering this, but through my own experience and through my own intuitive awakenings and realizations, I started to realize that this presence, this awareness, this light that I was, immersing myself in, bathing myself in when I was in deep states of sitting beyond thinking, sitting beyond the mind, I started to realize that this is where I connected directly with God. And since then, I've learnt that what makes humans so unique is that we have this soul, and every soul has the light of God inside of it. And this is because the human soul has been made in the image and likeness of its creator. We have been made in the image and likeness of God. And so we were given a mind to dream, to imagine, to create, just as our creator has a mind, a divine mind. We were also given a mind, and we were given God's light to give reality to our mind and to our imagination, to the creations of our mind. And so this is the power that we have been extended by our creator, by God, by source. And this is obviously the biggest blessing, and it comes with a cost, and humanity is deeply in the exploration of, I don't want to say the negative side, because I don't really believe in anything is wrong or bad, but one of the consequences that humanity is having a very real experience of at this time is that our mind can create whatever it wants. And the problem with that is that it can create things that are essentially not real, but because God has given us the free will to use our mind in the same respect that God uses its mind, which is without limitation. And God would never rob us of our free will to explore having a mind and being a creator. God would never want to take our free will away from being able to create whatever we wish to. And so the challenge that humanity is facing at this time is that our mind has created a version of reality that is based in duality. And duality is essentially an illusion, because we can never be separate. To be dual means to be two. And in true reality, where we are one with God, we all exist in oneness. We exist in oneness with God, with each other, with all of creation. But humanity right now is experiencing a reality of duality, which is two. And in duality, the underlying belief or premise of that creation, of that reality, is separation. And so this realm that we exist in, the third dimension, the fourth dimension, is based upon duality. And this is what we're experiencing at this time on this planet. And the dualistic nature of this realm has become so intensely dualistic and dense that we have an experience of a lot of suffering on the planet, and a lot of kind of darkness, dark creations that cause a lot of suffering. And so that there's nothing wrong with that. And this is why God doesn't intervene in the things that we think are bad or evil or wrong. God will not intervene, because God wants us to play and explore and, explore his infinite universe with this mind that we have been endowed with. And so God will never intervene in our creations, and they can get really dark, really dense, really dualistic, you know, infinitely. We can go infinitely in that direction if that's what we choose. But the further we go into duality and away from God, the more dense the reality, the creation feels, and the more based in separation, in lack, in fear. Basically, the more opposite it becomes to God and God's kingdom. And so, for each of us, as I mentioned in my last live video, for each of us, we explore that duality without even remembering that we're doing it. You know, we have our consciousness is veiled, and so we're exploring this dualistic reality, and we lose all memory that, you know, we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that we're eternally connected to God, that we have the light of God within us. That becomes veiled, and we lose sight of that. And so we become completely immersed in this dream of duality. And we get so immersed in that we end up having hundreds, if not thousands, of lifetimes in duality. And this is what I think of is kind of like getting stuck on the wheel of time or the wheel of karma. We, you know, we kind of separate our consciousness enough from God that we just get stuck in these perpetual cycles of playing in dualistic realms and essentially making decisions which then need to be resolved in some way. And this is what I see karma being, is that like every decision that we make needs to, it has a reality to it that needs to play out. And then at some point, it needs to kind of be reconciled or collapsed. But whilst we're in the dream of duality, we kind of just create endless karma. We just keep making decisions based upon the veiling of our consciousness, decisions based in fear, based in, you know, all of these belief systems that are inherent to this dualistic realm. And we kind of get like enslaved by them or entranced by them, and it becomes like a new operating system that in a way we get stuck in. Now, obviously, we're never stuck in anything, and we have the light of God within us, and we can always return. And so, like, it's like there's this thread of light that connects us to God, and we can venture into duality, into the darkness, into whatever realms, you know, interests us, and we can go as deep into that as we want. But when we get to the point where the suffering, the struggle, the illusion, the emptiness, you know, all of these qualities that start to accumulate the further we go seemingly from God, there will come a point where it's like something shifts inside of us and we say, enough. I don't want this anymore. And that's when the questions start coming up like, well, is this, you know, is this all there is? How can this be? How can my life feel so empty? You know, why am I suffering all the time? Why does this keep happening to me? Like these deeper questions start bubbling up from the soul. And when we start asking these questions, really, that's kind of like the point where we've hit as far as we want to go in playing in duality. And so once we hit that place, and it's like the burden of our own creation of this dualistic realm that doesn't reflect the kingdom of God. It's kind of like an inverted creation, and it reflects opposite qualities. And it's kind of mixed for a while, because you can live in complete oneness with God on this planet, and people are doing that. And you can live completely in the dark in evil creations on this planet. This planet can hold both, both spectrums. And for a lot of humans, they're like somewhere in between. There is some goodness in their life. They have some kind of a connection to God, even if they don't realize it. There is some level of peace, of happiness. And then there might be some areas of life where they're really struggling and there's some level of suffering. For me personally, for like the first 3 decades of my life, I was pretty much completely in the dark. There were moments, like glimmering moments, where I feel like God was reaching out to me and I felt divine love. And I feel like this was God calling me home, reaching out to me and saying, hey, remember who you are, remember the love, remember the ease, remember the peace. And I would have these beautiful moments, usually when I was out walking in nature by myself, and just like the beauty of nature. And when we're immersed in nature, nature is somewhere where we see God, because nature is God's pure creation. It's harder to feel God when we live in a city, when we live with like man-made structures around us all the time, because then we're just seeing the reflection of man's mind, of the dualistic mind that's created walls and objects and things. But when we're in nature, we're in that pure reflection of God's mind, and that helps us to remember who we are and our true nature and our connection to God. And so it was in these moments when my life felt really dark and I was still very much, if not completely, living in shadows and unconsciousness. I would have these like luminous moments where God would reach out to me and open my mind, open my heart, and remind me of where I come from and who I really am. Of course, I wasn't aware that that's what was happening at the time, as I didn't really believe in God back then. I believed in something divine, something beautiful, but I didn't have a relationship with God, and I didn't believe in God at this point. But those moments were like my little guiding lights, my little North Stars that would come often when I was going through really intense periods of suffering. And that would be enough to remind me that there's something more going on here, and just keep going because you're going to discover it. And so yeah, mm, just feeling into the essence of what it is that wants to be shared. Yeah, so we have the light of God within us, and we cannot be disconnected from that. It can get veiled through our own mind. And for me, it was through really learning how to still the mind, making meditation a regular part of my life, and really learning how to slow down, because we have been programmed, been trained, been conditioned to really be so busy and constantly doing, constantly striving, constantly planning, analyzing. There's just so much busyness in the mind. And so really learning how to still the mind and to find silence within. Really, we can't connect with our true essence, with God, with divine intelligence, until we create space for it. And the voice of God, of our higher self, of divine wisdom is a whisper compared to the voice of our ego, of our programming, of our conditioning. The voice of our ego and the false self is like constantly yelling at us, telling us, like, you should feel ashamed about this and you should feel guilty about this and why haven't you done this yet? And it's just like this kind of like constant berating voice in our head, and it feels terrible. And we all have this to some degree. I had it to an extreme level, and it was incredibly just crippling, and took me to the point of just wanting to end my life many times. And so for me, that created this push towards awakening, because I couldn't cope with the intensity and the darkness of my mind. I just couldn't cope with it. And so I started having a spiritual awakening, which was really about presence, silencing the mind, really learning to not listen to my thoughts, not take them seriously, and to just exist in silence, to move through my day in silence. And this was challenging because the addiction to thinking it's the most widespread addiction on the planet. And most of the planet doesn't even see it as an addiction. It's seen in our culture right now completely normal to be enslaved by the unconscious thoughts in our mind. And so it took a lot of will and a lot of devotion and determination to learn how to silence my mind. But I was willing to go through that process and go through that journey, because the alternative was to keep suffering in the way that I had been suffering. And at that point in my life, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was having panic attacks. I was still working a 9 to 5 job for the government at that point, and I was having panic attacks in the bathroom, and was just like, yeah, I just felt so lost and so confused, and had gotten myself entangled in all of these responsibilities and like a lease on a house that I was renting. And I just had all of these financial obligations, and I just felt stuck and overwhelmed, and it was leading to these panic attacks. And the suffering was just so great that it pushed me into really learning how to just completely silence and quiet and not take seriously what was going on up here, because all of our problems exist in the mind only. We don't have any problems outside of the mind. And that might be unbelievable to hear at this point, because your problems might feel so real and so important, and possibly even life threatening. It could be even like a life-threatening illness. But the truth is that any disharmony that is playing out in our life at some level is being created in the mind. And disharmony often arises in our life to act as a catalyst to help us surrender control and surrender all of the unnecessary doing and frantic busyness that we get stuck in our lives. Often we're not going to stop that willingly. It takes catalyst, it takes something to bring us to our knees. And often that comes in the form of some kind of devastating life situation where we just can't go on in the way that we were operating. And so, yeah, this looks different for each of us, but finding the space, the silence, the stillness is a very powerful way to begin discovering the light within you. And in this light, all the disharmony created by the mind, all of the illusions that create crippling fear and disharmony in our relationships, in our finances, in our health, in just all areas of life, in that presence, that stillness, all of those energies start to alchemize and process and to really transform. Because when we sit in that light, in that pure awareness, we are sitting in the light of God. And anything that we bring into the light of God, we see clearly. We see it through the eyes of God. And it might not happen like this first, like straight away. It takes, like I said, devotion and really committing to this to begin this shift. And it really is a shift in operating system, because we have, like I was saying before, we have this operating system that's based in duality. And the operating system of duality is all about survival. Because so long as we think we're separate, as we believe that we're a mortal, flesh and bones, physical being that, is going to eventually die, we have this unconscious urge towards survival. But in true reality, in the kingdom of God, we don't have a physical body, and we were never born, will never die. We're eternal beings, because everything in God's kingdom in true reality is eternal, because it's true. And this is what non-duality taught me, is that if something is true, it is changeless. It stays the same, and it is eternal. And for me, discovering that the awareness, the light within me that I could access through meditation, that never changes, because it is the light of God, and God's light never changes. God's light is like the sun. It's just eternal. It's just shining. It's just infinite. And through quieting the mind, sitting in stillness, and letting this beautiful light that shines through from the part of us that is aware, as we sit in that light, we start to remember eternity. We start to remember that which never changes. The world of duality is in constant change. It's constant death and rebirth, expansion, contraction. It's just these endless cycles of change and flux. And this is why it's so painful to be asleep to God's kingdom and the changeless, everlasting quality of God, is that we're trying to get our security from this physical world, from our physical lives. But everything in our life is in constant flux. It's in constant growth, decay, death, birth. It's, like the seasons. Everything in the physical realm, in the dualistic realm, is just constantly changing. And that's why life on earth today looks so different to how it looked 100 years ago. And in another 100 years, it will be so different to how it looks now. And so trying to build our security from our life here, it's just a fool's game. It just will never work, because how can you build a solid foundation on something that is constantly changing form, constantly falling apart and reforming? And so to live a life of peace, of love, of joy, we have to discover this deeper dimension of a solid foundation which doesn't change, and that is God. It's the dimension of truth, the dimension of eternity, which is God's kingdom. And everything in God's kingdom is eternal. It's not subject to the same laws as this dualistic realm. And so sitting in silence, sitting in stillness, and really getting to know this inner light, the light of God that is within you, it will start to open your consciousness back up to this deeper dimension of who you really are, of your true nature. And for me, this was just so powerful. It is so powerful and so liberating to awaken to who you are beyond form, beyond this body, this personality, this human that you think you are. There is this light inside of you that is unchanging, and it is the light of God. You are the light of God. So my invitation for you is to create more stillness in your life and really give yourself permission to slow down, because everything in your mind that's telling you that you need to be stressed, you need to be worried, you need to be responsible for all of these things, these are all of the programs that keep us entranced in the dream of duality, on this never-ending wheel of time, just never-ending lifetimes, incarnations, trying to resolve all of these decisions that we've made from fear and the repercussions of that, and just endless healing. And there's a beauty to it. Don't get me wrong, there's a beauty to this exploration, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to be on some level. So there's nothing wrong with having lifetimes as a soul, as a human on this planet or on other planets. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you arrive at the point where the weight of duality, the weight of the separation from love, from joy, from peace, from ease, from abundance, all of these things that have been given to us by God, they are our divine birthright. When you get sick of, trying to find those things in everything and not being able to find them anywhere in these flimsy forms of this physical world, then a readiness awakens within you where it's time to find these things in the only place that they are, which is in the light of your true self, in the light of God, in the kingdom of heaven, which is true reality. It's the changeless, timeless reality that we belong to, that is our home. And on some level, there is some part of us still there, because that's where God is, and the light of God is within us. So that we're still connected to that. And on the deepest level, we all remember that place, which is why being here can just sometimes feel so wrong. And it's like we have a homesickness for something we don't even realize. And that place is our true home with God, where we have it all. So if you're ready for that, if something within you is aching for that, give yourself the permission to slow down and to be still and to discover this awareness, this presence that is within you, but is not of the mind. It shines into the mind, but it's actually before the mind. And so we need to allow the mind to calm, to slow down, so that this light, this presence can be noticed. And you might not find it straight away. It can be quite buried behind a lot of mental noise. So anything that creates mindfulness, that creates a slowing down, is moving in the right direction. And then, when you can find these times where you can really just sit and be still and be present and just allow this inner silence to be here, this is where you're going to start to get to know the light within you, which is going to lead you eventually all the way back home to God and to your true home. So this is my prayer for you, and I'm sending you so much love and blessings as you explore this. And this was what I really focused on in more of the beginning stages of my journey. And there's so much more, once there's that space for you to connect with who you really are, to connect with God, that's where, the connection can really start to flourish, and we can bring in things like prayer and other ways to really invite God in to our mind and our being in a much bigger way. But the foundation is creating the space, because unless there's space, God has no chance of speaking with us when the noise of the mind is so loud. So I hope this resonates and lands in your heart. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll connect with you again in the next video. Bye for now.